World War II gave cinema some of its greatest stories of courage, sacrifice, and human resilience. But not every trip back to that battlefield ended in glory. Some films stumbled so badly they managed to anger veterans, mislead audiences, and even embarrass the very directors who made them. So what happens when Hollywood takes one of the most important chapters in human history and fumbles it beyond belief? Today, we're diving into 15 World War II movies so poorly made they became infamous cautionary tales. And trust me, some of these will leave your jaw hanging. Pearl Harbor, 2001. Few films in modern history wasted potential quite like Michael Bay's Pearl Harbor. With a budget north of $140 million, a cast led by Ben Affleck, Josh Hartnett, and Kate Beckinsale, and the promise of reliving one of America's most defining moments, this should have been an unforgettable epic. Instead, audiences were handed a glossy soap opera masquerading as history. The infamous love triangle consumed most of the runtime, pushing the actual attack on Pearl Harbor into the background, where it felt like an afterthought. Critics shredded it for drowning history in melodrama. Instead of highlighting the courage of soldiers, nurses, and civilians who endured that morning of fire and chaos, the film reduced the story to two fighter pilots who suddenly looked more like action superheroes than human beings. Veterans who had lived through the era were publicly outraged, calling the film insulting, hollow, and dishonest. Historians pointed out dozens of inaccuracies, from the way aircraft were depicted to romantic conflicts that never existed. In the end, Michael Bay proved that explosions alone can't save bad writing. The film may have made money thanks to heavy marketing, but its reputation collapsed almost instantly. Even today, Pearl Harbor is cited as a warning of what happens when spectacle is chosen over substance. But even the world's most celebrated directors aren't immune to disaster. Steven Spielberg's 1941, 1979. Yes, even Steven Spielberg can miss the mark. 1941 is living proof. Coming off the back-to-back triumphs of Jaws and Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Spielberg was at the height of his powers when he decided to tackle World War II with comedy. On paper, it sounded like a surefire hit. Los Angeles descending into chaos after Pearl Harbor. A dream cast including John Belushi, Dan Aykroyd, and Ned Beatty, and the biggest budget comedy Hollywood had ever attempted. Instead of sharp satire, though, audiences got a bloated, noisy spectacle that mistook chaos for humor. The film cost nearly $35 million, a staggering sum for the late 1970s. But that money went into elaborate set pieces, exploding houses, runaway tanks, and fighter planes buzzing Hollywood Boulevard that rarely landed laughs. Spielberg himself later admitted the reaction was devastating, saying it felt like critics treated him as if he had committed a war crime. That's how badly 1941 went over. Even John Wayne, Hollywood's most patriotic leading man, refused to appear in the film, calling the script the most anti-American thing he had ever read. When Wayne sounds the alarm, you know something has gone wrong. Yes, 1941 managed to make some money, but compared to Spielberg's previous blockbusters, it was a disappointment that tarnished his otherwise golden run. Decades later, it remains a cautionary tale of what happens when a director at the top of his game takes a swing at comedy and strikes out. And that wasn't the last time Hollywood tried to turn real history into cartoonish chaos. Red Tails, 2012. The story of the Tuskegee Airmen, the first black fighter pilots in American history, deserved a powerful, layered film. With George Lucas producing, Red Tails was supposed to finally give them the cinematic spotlight they had long been denied. Instead, what audiences got was a hollow, over-slick action movie that valued flashy dogfights over substance and squandered one of the most inspiring stories of World War II. Critics quickly pointed out that the script never dug into the full weight of racism the airmen faced, both at home and within the military. Instead of a nuanced exploration of systemic prejudice, the film offered a handful of generic speeches and cardboard characters ripped straight from a video game cutscene. The dialogue was clunky, the stakes were low, and the pilots felt less like real men and more like action figures. Even the aerial battles, hyped as the film's saving grace, looked sterile and overpolished. The digital effects lacked the grit and tension that makes aerial combat gripping. Worse, the film blurred fact and fiction so heavily that many viewers walked away believing its invented storylines were true. Historians and veterans alike expressed deep disappointment. With only around 40% on Rotten Tomatoes, the reception was lukewarm at best. What should have been a defining tribute to trailblazers who broke barriers and proved doubters wrong instead reduced them to cliches. But if sidelining history was bad, what happened in this next film flat out erased the real heroes. Windtalkers, 2002. A film about the Navajo Code Talkers, whose unbreakable language played a vital role in Allied victories, should have been groundbreaking. Directed by John Woo and starring Nicolas Cage, Windtalkers had the ingredients for success. But instead of spotlighting the Navajo heroes, Hollywood chose to center the story on Cage's Marine character, turning it into yet another generic action flick. The Navajo soldiers were reduced to side characters in their own story, while Cage dominated the screen with slow-motion shootouts and melodrama. To make matters worse, the studio invented an entirely false subplot where Marines were ordered to kill code talkers if capture seemed likely. Historians quickly pointed out that no such order ever existed. Native American groups immediately called out the film for sidelining the real heroes. John Woo admitted he wanted to focus on trauma and brotherhood, but studio executives demanded more action. The result was a movie that satisfied no one. Critics called it inaccurate, veterans dismissed it as Hollywood fantasy, and audiences simply found it underwhelming. With a budget of more than $100 million, it failed to recover its costs. Windtalkers should have been an inspiring story of Native American resilience and intelligence. Instead, it became a textbook example of how Hollywood mishandles history when explosions are put before truth. And if you think that's bad, wait until you hear how Hollywood handled one of the most terrifying naval tragedies ever. USS Indianapolis, Men of Courage, 2016. The sinking of the USS Indianapolis is one of the most harrowing true stories of World War II. After delivering components of the atomic bomb, the ship was torpedoed, leaving hundreds of sailors stranded in shark-infested waters for days. It's a tale of survival, horror, and sacrifice. But the film adaptation starring Nicolas Cage turned it into something unintentionally laughable. Instead of capturing the desperation of those men, the movie served up CGI sharks that looked like they belonged in a bargain bin video game. Dialogue was stiff, acting was wooden, and the pacing lurched between uneven action and soap opera romance. Critics shredded it, giving it a dismal 18% on Rotten Tomatoes. With a $40 million budget, it only pulled in a couple million at the box office, a staggering failure by any standard. Survivors and families of the Indianapolis were especially disappointed, feeling the film didn't honor the men who lived through that nightmare. The real story deserved gravity and respect. What it got instead was a film that looked more like a parody. But historical inaccuracy didn't stop at low-budget disasters. Even big studio productions got it painfully wrong. Battle of the Bulge, 1965. You'd think a film about one of the most pivotal battles of World War II would be bulletproof. Instead, Battle of the Bulge is remembered as one of the most inaccurate war movies ever made. Released in 1965 with a star-studded cast including Henry Fonda, Robert Shaw, and Telly Savalas, it promised to deliver an epic recreation of the desperate winter clash. What audiences got instead was a geography-defying mess. The real battle was fought in snow-covered forests, But the movie was shot in sunny Spain, where not a snowflake could be found. The result looked more like a desert skirmish than the brutal winter struggle soldiers actually endured. The German tanks? Not authentic either. The production used modern vehicles dressed up to look the part, fooling no one. Even veterans who had fought in the Ardennes blasted the film for misrepresenting their sacrifice. The script simplified the complex battle into cartoonish good versus evil storytelling. Despite its sweeping camera shots and big budget, it failed to resonate with audiences who expected realism and instead got Hollywood spectacle. At least that one looked like a real movie. Unlike this next project, which critics said looked worse than a mobile game. Airstrike, 2018. Imagine handing Bruce Willis and Adrian Brody a World War II epic with a $65 million budget, only for the final product to look like a discount reject. That's Airstrike, a disaster set during the Japanese bombing of a Chinese city in 1943. On paper, it had the makings of an international hit, but the CGI looked like plastic toys, planes moved with no weight, and explosions carried no impact. The dubbing was so clumsy that it distracted from even the simplest conversations. Worst of all, Bruce Willis seemed barely awake, trudging through the role as though he were counting down the minutes until payday. Brody fared no better, swallowed by a confused script that gave his character no purpose. Behind the scenes, the project was plagued with re-edits, reshoots, and scandals that left the final cut looking patched together. By the time it stumbled into release, critics shredded it, audiences ignored it, and theaters yanked it almost immediately. Online, it became a running joke, with people comparing it to cheap mobile games that offered more realism and heart. But not every disaster came from bad CGI. Some collapsed because they didn't even know what tone they were aiming for.